28, but
well, good afternoon and welcome to season 2 of Trowel Talk Alive. My name is Nancy McDonald. I'm the moderator for today. And I want to thank you for encouraging comments that you made on our season 1. And then with the enthusiasm from our master gardeners and viewers, of course, we decided a second season was in order. You will see some new presenters this year, along with familiar ones such as Rob, who's going to speak today. Judith Cox is our buddy, and she is monitoring the chat line for questions, so type them in there. You will be familiar with Rob. He gave a talk last year on propagation, and he's going to talk on pruning, on flowering shrubs. And boy, this is a subject we get a lot of questions about as master gardeners. So it's very timely talk today. So over to Rob, who's been gardening since he was 10 and has lots of tips to give us.
oh, thank you, Nancy. I just wanted to make sure that everything was working. Well, welcome to everyone. With the weather that we're having today, it's as Nancy said, it's a perfect time to talk about pruning shrubs, especially the ones that that bloom on new wood. But I'll get into that shortly. So here's a picture of a lilac that that you would prune after it blooms. But before we talk about the lilac, I'm going to talk about the tools that you would need to do your pruning. You need bypass pruners or secateurs. If you have, and they're good for trimming something up to about 3/4 of an inch or a little more than a centimeter in diameter. Loping shears are similar. They are also bypass. And they're good for trimming branches up to maybe a couple of inches or 2.5 centimeters in diameter. You also need a pruning saw, and I've shown 2 examples here of one with a long single blade and then a smaller one with a foldable blade. There's some rubbing alcohol, a clean rag, and a sharpener to sharpen your pruners before you start. One of the things that you may have, one of the things that you may have been aware of is there's 2 types of pruners. There's an anvil pruner and there's a bypass pruner. The anvil pruner is on the left, and it shows a blade that hits a flat, fairly wide, flat surface. You should only use the anvil pruner to trim dead wood. And the reason is that when you use that pruner, it squashes the stem that you're trying to prune on both sides of the blade, which damages the ability and prevents the stem from heating or healing very quickly. Whereas the bypass pruner is a single blade with the end on the back that the blade bypasses, and so it only damages the if you use it properly, only damages the part of the stem that you will be removing. You'll see a little bit of that later. So here's an example here. To do your pruning with the secateurs or loping shears, you want to make sure that the secateurs are sharp at the beginning. This is where that sharpener comes in. So touch up the blade, make sure it's sharp. You can, it shouldn't take you too long. I have the one that I was showing in the picture there was a one with finely and small little bits of diamond in the blade that does a fairly good job, does quite a good job actually. Make sure that you hold the pruning shears such that the blade is on the side of the plant that will remain after you cut. So you can see in this case that the blade is underneath this part of the pruner. So this part of the stem will come off and the blade will make a sharp cut at the just where the blade is, and you need to place that depending on what you're removing. I was trimming a hydrangea earlier this week, and I put the blade within a centimeter of the buds I was trying to leave on the hydrangea, so that when you cut, there's a little bit of growth to allow it to dry up and heal properly without damaging the bud. The other thing that you should do is after every cut, take your rag that you've dampened in rubbing alcohol and clean off the pruners, so that if there's any type of disease or something there that that's on the stem that you're cutting, that you don't transmit that to another piece of the plant. Now here's a case where you have what is called a stem collar. You can see that it moves out a bit from, this is the trunk of the shrub. Here's the stem, and right here you see this little bit of what is called a collar. So you shouldn't, when you prune, you shouldn't try to cut that straight across there. You should cut it so that it out here on the edge, so that it's not, it will provide a really good amount of space for the cut to heal. Whereas if you cut it on the inside, it's making a much larger cut, and it'll take longer for the cut to heal. Here's an example of where I've got the blade against the stem collar, and the back part of the shears are sticking out along the part of the stem that I'll remove. If you're using a pruning saw, there are basically 3 steps that you need to follow. And what I've done is I've tried to mark some spots on the stem that I was cutting to give you an idea of the process. But the first thing that you do is you take an undercut of the branch you want to remove. And in this case, it's between the yellow and the green spots on the stem. So that's your first cut. The second cut, you cut it on the top, and you'll do it outside this green stem here. And this is where your undercut occurred the first time. And then the final cut is that a lot of the times when you make this top cut, the branch will break, and because you're cutting the top, this bottom part will hold, and it'll strip right back to the cut. And so so you'll end up with a blunt or a ragged piece of stem at that point in time. And the final cut will be just to the right of this initial cut, or the first undercut. And that way there you'll remove it and make a nice flat, straight surface. Now, the only reason that I'm doing the final cut here underneath as opposed to from the top is that there wasn't enough space to get the pruning shears in here, so that I could cut it off flush with the edge of that branch. The other thing that you need to be aware of is after you've finished pruning, leave the branch in the stem to heal on its own. Don't apply any paint or any kind of coating to the wood, because all that does is provide a barrier for disease or insects to get into the branch and cause some disease or rotting to take place. So after you perform the cut, make sure that you leave it blank, you leave it just plain, and it'll dry on its own, and it'll heal up quite well. Now, when do you prune? Well, as a general rule, shrubs that bloom in the spring or early summer, typically they bloom on old wood. Basically, what that means is that the flower buds have formed on the plant and before the winter, and they hang on the plant over the winter as a bud. And in the spring, when things start to grow, it swells up and produces the flower. An example of this is your lilac. It blooms early in the spring on old wood that, as I say, the flower bud started last fall. Other shrubs that bloom on new wood, and an example of this was the hydrangea that I trimmed up just this week at home. It blooms on new wood, which means that that plant grows the new wood, and that the flower bud grows at the end of that new growing stem. So if you want to prune plants that bloom in the summer or the fall, you want to make sure that you prune them before the plant starts growth in the spring. Now, right now, because of the weather and that, you probably can still do some pruning because the buds that are there that are going to be the new spring growth have just swollen and they really haven't started to grow. So you can still prune them if you would like. Whereas plants or shrubs that bloom later in the spring or early in the summer or fall, as the case may be, you prune them right after they bloom, so that any of the material that you remove will have a time to regrow new stems and the branches, and create new flower buds for the next year. Spring flowering shrubs are hydrangea, which is the little yellow pea shrub, deutzia, flowering almond. Now, I'm not sure how much flowering almond is growing here because it's marginally hardy, but I think you can grow it in a sheltered spot. Forsythia, which you're all familiar with, the bright yellow flowers. Lilac, purple sand cherry, purple leaf sand cherry. The flowers aren't that particular impressive, but it is a spring flowering shrub. Rhododendron and viburnum. So all of these shrubs, you should prune them after they've flowered. The summer and the fall flowering shrubs examples are hydrangea, lavender, mock orange, pink spirea, potentilla. I have one white with white flowers, Abbott's Wood, I believe. Roses, smokebush, summer sweet. These are all shrubs which you can prune early in the spring, and they will bloom on the growth of this year, producing their flowers. The other things that you might want to consider are if you grow yellow or red twig dogwood, you can remove some of those stems early in the year after they've come out, and it will stimulate new growth for the bright stems in the following year, or over the winter, I should say. So what do you prune? Well, the first thing you do is when you take a look at your shrub, you remove stems that are classified as a member of the 5 Ds. So these are branches that are dead, and you can use the secateurs, the bypass pruning shears, to remove dead ones. It's just that the anvil pruners, you should only use remove dead wood with them, because otherwise they'll damage the stem. You can remove old or dying branches, any of them that are damaged, them through whatever, somebody falling on the shrub or whatever, ones that are disfigured or diseased wood. And certainly make sure, regardless, as I discussed earlier, that if you do see something, in fact, even if you don't, make sure after every cut that you treat the blade of your saw or the blade of your pruning shears with the alcohol to remove any pathogens that remain on the blades. Remember also to remove cross branches. If you do this early when the plant's small, you won't be left with a big hole in the plant as it grows up. The other thing that you can do is that you can remove older branches to the ground from the center of the shrub, and you should do this every 3 to 4 years. This will ensure that your growth is vigorous and that it'll produce lots of blooms. And I know this is a difficult thing to do because you're removing a a fairly significant portion of the shrub, but typically you only would remove no more than a third of the growth of the shrub at any one time. So it still should look good, even if you are removing a fairly central member of the plant. The other thing that you want to do is you want to open up the center of the shrub to allow light in. So this helps to prevent disease, allows more vigorous growth. And lastly is aesthetics. What looks good, you'll learn that from experience. It's not something that can be taught necessarily, but it's something that can be learned and just through experience. So you'll see that in the examples I'm showing next. So this is my hydrangea. It's just a small, I think it grows to about 4.5 feet tall hydrangea before I started. And you can see there's a lot of growth in here, a little bit crossing each other and whatever. And so what I chose to do was to reduce the size of the shrub, because where it's growing, it touches onto a path, and I don't want it taking up too much space. So what I've done is I've pruned it back, within, as I mentioned before, within 1 centimeter of the buds and that are showing on the stem. And the new growth will come from those buds. And this is what it looks like after. Now, when I mentioned about opening up the plant, one of the things that to leave the center open, one of the things that you can do after you've trimmed off the branch, you can see 2 buds here on this particular stem. And what I've done is this one was pointed towards the inside of the shrub, and this points to the outside. So what I did was, just using my finger, I just rubbed off this bud right here so that it wouldn't grow in that direction. And that's basically all you need to do to limit that growth and to open up the middle of the shrub. Sometimes you might need to take that branch further down to the ground to make sure that you get more space, but those are the basics that you need to be aware of when you do some pruning. And as I say now, if you're pruning the plants that bloom later in the year, it's a good time to do it. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Rob. That was excellent. Yes, there are some questions. For example, from Sandra, she says, can you prune summer, fall blooming shrubs after blooming in early winter?
Now, when did the shrub bloom? In the spring?
In the summer, fall.
No, you shouldn't, because you'll be removing the, I mean, you can if you have to, but just be aware that if you do, you're removing the buds that the flowers will come from next spring.
Okay. Also, Marianne just wanted to clarify that there are some hydrangeas that bloom on old wood and should not be pruned. The H. macrophylla or H. serrata, for example.
That's true. I think that you need to take a look. When I say hydrangeas, most of the ones that we grow here are the paniculata and the grandiflora. Some of the other ones aren't quite as hardy, so most people don't grow those. But yes, I think you need to verify whether it's a summer blooming, a spring blooming, or a summer or fall blooming shrub to guide you in how to prune it.
And could you please comment on propagating gooseberry bushes when you're pruning?
I don't have any actual experience with gooseberry bushes. I know that I have pruned the hydrangeas that I pruned in the backyard before. It blooms later. Now the gooseberry, I'm trying to think, it probably fruits on new wood, I would think, because it blooms later. So what you can do is you can, if it blooms on new wood, you probably can take a cutting as you would be pruning, and there are a number of ways of doing it, but I think you could try 2 methods. One is to put the stem cutting in some water, And make sure that it's not too big, probably no more than 6 inches in length. So if you were removing a couple of maybe I don't know, 30 centimeters or so of branches from your stem, you should then reduce that to the top, say 15 centimeters at the most. So throw the bottom part away, and you can put that into some damp vermiculite or damp potting mix that's soilless. And regardless of the approach, you should reduce the size of the leaves by cutting the leaves in half that are on the shrub at that time, and then cover it with a Ziploc bag or something like that that's opened at the bottom that you put over as a cover. And you could also put in some rooting hormone, but it should, if it's going to root, it should root within 3 to 4 weeks, I would think.
Yeah, I think so.
But don't give up. Don't give up.
No, I found that the gooseberries themselves, if you take the seeds, they are very easy to grow from seed.
Now, do they grow? I guess I've not done that, but I wasn't sure. Do they reproduce exactly, or are they, if they're hybrids or selections, they might not produce the same quality of berry that or fruit that.
That is definitely.
And so cuttings are the way to go if you really want to do it.
I would say if you want to be careful, I agree, Rob. Now about cleaning the blade, if you're pruning one hydrangea that requires many cuts,
right,
do you need to clean the blade after each one, or is it cleaning after each plant?
No, you should do it after each cut, because there could be a branch on that plant that is diseased without it being the whole plant. In which case you would remove, you'd try to remove as much of that stem as you could. I mean, it's only a quick swipe with the rag. It's not it shouldn't cause you a lot of slowdowns in the job that you're doing. But yeah, you should do it after every cut.
Is there, do you know the bush cranberry shrub?
I know it's a viburnum, but I don't know the species.
Yeah. So when would you say to prune it? The viburnums you want to prune after, right?
Yeah. If they bloom, if it fruits later in the year, which the cranberry does, then you would prune it right after it blooms, after it flowers, or produces the berries, I would say. Because then it's after that it'll produce the new buds for the growth next year.
And also, can you propagate the cuttings from spring or fall bloomers? Do you think it's possible?
It is. Most of the things that I've propagated have been with softwood or semi-hardwood cuttings, and I'm not sure if you were doing it on a hardwood cutting, then you tend to have to prepare your cutting in the fall, let it sit in a fridge or outside, and then let it form a callus on the cut, and then insert those into some rooting material in the spring and allow it to grow that way. But I've not had a lot of experience with that. I understand the theory, but I haven't really done it.
Maureen would like to confirm that right about now is the time to be pruning most hydrangeas, not all of them.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, like, for example, your grandiflora, the ones that you can reduce those right to the ground, basically, within a bud on the stem. You should do that now. The same with the other hydrangeas, the paniculata and that type of thing. Paniculata, yeah, blooms later. So you could trim that now.
What do you recommend on red Ocer Dogwood?
Okay.
I hope I got that right.
Ocer Dogwood. Well, what you're trying to do in pruning that is you're trying to remove the older stems that have gotten lost their bright color. So if they were a red twigged or a yellow twig, you're basically selectively removing some of the older stems in the plant and stimulating new growth. So you would do that in the spring, so that the new growth that grows up has got the vibrant red or the vibrant yellow color that you would see in the fall and through the next winter. And I would take those right down to the crown of the plant.
Let's say you had a shrub that was pruned by a bunny or a deer over the winter. How would you deal with that?
I have that problem right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let it bud out before I do any trimming, because I'm not sure. When I look at the shrub, it looks, and I've looked at it fairly closely, it looks like most of the damage is on one side of the stem. It doesn't girdle the whole stem. So I'm going to let it bud out and then do my pruning when I see where the growth is, because it's too early to tell right
now. How do you recommend pruning lavender?
Lavender can be pruned in the fall. You can remove some of it, but most of the time you would prune it in the spring before growth starts, to stimulate the buds that are the dormant buds that are on the stems.
When would you prune false spirea and true spirea?
I think false spirea could be pruned in the spring, and similarly with the true spirea, that you can prune them in the spring because they bloom on the new wood as opposed to old wood. So they bloom early in the year, and that's where you would prune is in the year, early in the year.
Here's an interesting one. I've been pruning my fall blooming hydrangea after blooms have dried out, usually around mid-November. I'm still getting lots of blooms the following year. Am I doing it wrong? Or
no. I mean, that's you could do it in the fall. A lot of times it's recommended that you wait until spring, only because if that shrub suffers any damage, you may have to go back and do some extra pruning in the spring. But basically, you're doing the same thing. You're just advancing it a little bit. Those plants will bloom on new wood, and that's fine. But just to be aware, if we get a really hard, cold winter, it could further damage the stem, and you may have to go back and do a bit more pruning in the spring.
If there's another question, maybe just one more question, Judith.
All right. When it comes to pruning, what is your opinion on maybe leaving things for a little while because of overwintering insects or things like that?
I mean, and I'm assuming what you mean is in terms of habitat for the overgrowing insects. Yeah, I think that's possible to leave that a little later, but you have to be careful, because if you leave it too late, when you do prune the shrub, it's going to bleed and cause other problems. So, or potential other problems, provide a location or a space where disease can enter the shrub. Whereas if it's dormant or mostly dormant, you won't get that. The chances are reduced. Let's put it that way. So I think once you start seeing like my buds had swollen on my hydrangea, and I maybe should have pruned it a week earlier or so, but I think it's okay. And most of the times, my impression of where the bugs hibernate is on or close to the ground, not up in the stems of the plants. But I could be wrong. That I'm most familiar with them hiding into the leaves and the debris on the ground as opposed to up in the stems.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Well, thank you very much. And if there's any other questions, or when people go away from the presentation, they may think of something on pruning, and they can absolutely always send it to our email helpline. Thank you so much, Rob. That was very, very good. And thank you, Judith, for being the buddy. So next week, please join us. It's going to be Gardening Starts with a Plan with Claire Leduc. And so also very timely advice if you're thinking of starting a new garden bed or plan. So join us then, and thank you for joining.